The gun was already cocked when Kate Talbot walked through the door of the Sunrise Saloon in Caldwell, Kansas, and every man inside went utterly silent. Not because of the pistol, not because of the dust on her traveling coat or the way her dark hair had come loose from its pins after 3 days on a stage that smelled like sweat and misfortune. They went silent because she walked straight to the bar, set down a leather satchel that clinked with the weight of tools, looked the barkeep dead in the eyes and said, "I need to speak with Jasper Ford. I understand he owns the Double F Ranch south of here, and I understand he is currently looking for a livestock manager. I also understand that half the men in this county have told him no woman is capable of doing the job. Tell him Kate Talbot is here to prove every one of them wrong." The barkeep, a broad man with a mustache that looked like a small animal had taken up residence above his lip, stared at her for a full 5 seconds before he started to laugh. That was his mistake. Because from the back of the room, near the card table where 4 ranchers were deep into a losing game of poker, a chair scraped hard across the floorboards. A man unfolded himself from that chair tall, broad across the shoulders in a way that said years of physical labor rather than vanity, and he walked toward the bar with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned every room he had ever entered. Jasper Ford, 32 years old, owner of the largest cattle operation in Sumner County. Dark hair shot through with the kind of lines the Kansas sun puts in a man before his time. Eyes the color of the sky just before a serious storm, a deep, unsettled gray. He looked at the barkeep first and the laughing stopped immediately. Then he looked at Kate. She did not look away. She held his gaze with a steadiness that he was not expecting, and in that first moment of contact, not soft, not flirtatious, but direct and entirely unafraid, something shifted in the air between them like the pressure change before lightning strikes. "Miss Talbot," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, entirely controlled. "You came a long way." "From St. Louis," she said. 400 miles give or take. My legs are still arguing about it." He almost smiled. Almost. "I've had 12 applications for that position in the past 6 weeks," he said. "Every one of them was a man with at least 10 years of range experience. I turned them all down." "I know," she said. "I also know why. You don't have a management problem out at the Double F, you have a disease problem. Your cattle are showing early signs of Texas fever, and none of those 12 men recognized it because they've never worked a herd that ran south of the Red River. I have." The saloon was so quiet that the oil lamps could be heard sputtering. Jasper Ford stared at her. Something in his expression shifted, not softened, not yet, but changed in the way a locked door changes when someone finally inserts the correct key. "You'd better come sit down," he said. "I'd better," she agreed. And that was how it started, not with softness. Not with any of the romance or sweetness that the story would eventually grow into. It started with a woman who had arrived in the West with nothing but her name, her knowledge, and a refusal to be dismissed, and a man who was about to discover that those 3 things were worth more than anything else she could have brought. But before we follow them to that table, before we watch the walls between them begin their slow, stubborn collapse, it is worth understanding how Kate Talbot arrived at this place, and what she left behind to get here. Kate had grown up in St. Louis in a household that was unusual for the 1880s in that it was run by a woman. Her mother, Eleanor Talbot, had kept books for her late husband's veterinary practice for 15 years and had simply continued doing so after he died of typhoid fever when Kate was 7. Eleanor was meticulous, sharp, and deeply pragmatic, and she raised Kate to be the same. Kate had learned to read before she was 5. She had learned animal physiology by reading her father's medical texts before she was 10. By the time she was 15, she was accompanying local veterinarians on their rounds, not as an observer but as an assistant, and more than one of them had quietly admitted to Eleanor that the girl knew more than half the apprentices they had trained. The problem was that no formal school of veterinary medicine in the country would accept a woman in 1881. Kate had spent 4 years attempting to change that. She had written letters to institutions in Philadelphia, Chicago, and New York. She had attended lectures. She was not officially permitted to attend by standing outside open windows in the cold. She had read every veterinary journal she could obtain and had corresponded, under the initials Kate Talbot, with researchers in Europe who wrote back with collegial respect until they discovered her given name, at which point the correspondence typically cooled with polite regret. She had also, in those 4 years, done something that turned out to matter more than any formal credential. She had worked. She had worked livestock markets, cattle yards, and slaughterhouses, learning in the raw, practical way that no classroom could replicate. She had treated horses for colic and cattle for bloat and sheep for foot rot. She had assisted in surgeries and difficult births and the grim, necessary work of putting suffering animals down. She had learned to read the signs of illness in livestock, the way a doctor reads symptoms in a human patient through observation, pattern recognition, and a deep, almost intuitive understanding of what healthy looked like so that unhealthy was immediately visible. She was 24 years old when she read the advertisement in the St. Louis Dispatch that changed the direction of her life. Experienced livestock manager sought. Double F Ranch, Caldwell, Kansas. Candidate must have practical experience with large cattle herds, strong management capability, and the ability to operate independently in a frontier environment. Inquiries to Jasper Ford, Caldwell, Kansas. CO The Sunrise Saloon. She had clipped it out of the paper with scissors, folded it into her pocket, and gone home to pack a bag. Her mother had stood in the doorway of Kate's bedroom watching her fold shirts into a travel case and said, "Kansas," in the tone of someone who has just been informed of an unreasonable mathematical result. "The frontier is where the cattle are," Kate said. "The cattle are where my knowledge is useful. My knowledge is the only currency I currently possess, so I am going where it can be spent." Eleanor Talbot was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Write to me weekly." "Twice weekly," Kate said. "I know you worry." She left 3 days later on the Missouri-Kansas-Texas line with a single leather satchel containing her veterinary instruments, 2 changes of clothes, 4 books, and $43 in savings. The stagecoach from Kansas City to Caldwell had taken the better part of 3 days across land that grew progressively more vast and silent and beautiful in a way that felt like a physical pressure against her chest, as if the sky itself was leaning down to look at her. She had not been afraid. She had been, in fact, more alive than she had felt in years. Now she sat across a scarred wooden table from Jasper Ford while the rest of the saloon tried and failed to pretend they were not listening. "Tell me about the fever," he said. He had his forearms on the table, his hat set to one side, and he was watching her with an intensity that was entirely professional but was also, she noticed, with a precise, practical part of her brain that catalogued everything entirely undiluted. He was not looking at her the way most men looked at women. He was looking at her the way men look at things they are trying to figure out. She found she liked it considerably. "Texas fever," she said. Technically bovine pyroplasmosis, though that terminology is relatively recent. It is a blood-borne illness transmitted by cattle ticks, specifically Buphalus annulatus, though nobody has formally established the transmission mechanism yet. What is known is that cattle driven north from Texas carry ticks that are lethal to northern-raised cattle that have no immunity. The symptoms in the early stage are fever, loss of appetite, reduced milk production in cows, and a distinctive yellowing of the mucous membranes. In the late stage, the animal's urine turns dark red. It gets called red water disease or bloody murine in some parts of the country. By that stage, you are losing livestock. Jasper Ford was very still. "How do you know my cattle are showing early symptoms?" asked. "You have not been to the ranch." "No," she said, "but I spoke with the 2 men who drove your last section of the herd up from the Red River country last spring. They are currently employed at a horse outfit 4 miles north of here, and I spoke with them yesterday evening when the stage stopped to water the horses. They described what they saw in the herd on the trail and afterward, including the fact that 3 animals have been sluggish and off feed for the past 3 weeks. That is Texas fever. The good news is that at the stage you appear to be at, it is manageable. The bad news is that it will not manage itself, and if you wait another month, you will lose a significant portion of your investment. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through Caldwell's Main Street with the particular dry persistence of a Kansas summer afternoon, and somewhere behind the bar a clock was ticking. "What would you do about it?" he asked. "Isolate the affected animals immediately," she said. "They are still shedding ticks. Remove them from contact with the main herd and establish a quarantine area. Then do a systematic inspection of every animal in the herd, because I would estimate you have more affected animals than the 3 your drivers noticed. Remove ticks manually and treat the skin with a dilution of kerosene and lard. I have seen this work in Texas, and I can formulate the correct ratio. Feed the affected animals supplemental iron-rich feed to support their blood. Rotate the main herd away from the pastures the infected animals have used for at least 90 days, because the ticks survive in the grass. And going forward, never commingle Texas-bred cattle with your northern stock without a quarantine period first." Jasper Ford sat back in his chair. He had the look of a man who has been carrying a heavy weight and has just been offered solid ground to set it down on, but is not yet sure the ground will hold. "I've had a veterinarian from Wichita out to look at those animals twice," he said. "He told me they were thin from the trail and would recover." "He was wrong," Kate said, not unkindly, simply factually. "It is a relatively newly understood disease. Many veterinarians in the northern states have not yet encountered it. I have because I spent 2 years working with livestock operations that received cattle from Texas." "That is impressive knowledge," he said. "It is practical knowledge," she said. "I am not particularly interested in impressing you, Mr. Ford. I am interested in working." He looked at her steadily for another moment. Then he said, "The position pays $40 a month with full room and board. I have a foreman named Chet Briggs who has been running the operation since my previous manager left in the spring, and he will not be pleased to have his authority supplemented. I have 11 ranch hands who have never taken direction from a woman. The ranch house has a separate room at the east end that you would have exclusive use of. The nearest town of any size is Caldwell, which is 9 miles south. The work starts before sunrise and does not end at a scheduled time. I have roughly 800 head of cattle and 40 horses. Is any of that a deterrent?" "None of it," Kate said, "including Chet Briggs." "Especially not him," she said. "Difficult men who do not want to listen are something I have extensive experience with. I generally outlast them." Something genuine moved through Jasper Ford's expression then, something that might in another moment and another man have simply been a smile. In him it was more contained than that, but she caught the edge of it, the warmth at the corner of his mouth and the fractional brightening of his storm-gray eyes. "When can you start?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "I need a bath and approximately 7 hours of sleep first." The stagecoach was uncomfortable in a way that borders on criminal. He did smile then briefly, like a door opened and quickly shut. "The hotel is 2 buildings east," he said. "I will be here tomorrow at 6 in the morning with a horse for you." Kate picked up her satchel, stood, and offered her hand across the table. He took it, a firm, careful handshake, his hand large and calloused and warm against hers. Neither of them held on a second longer than was appropriate. But both of them were aware, in the particular, precise way of intelligent people who notice things, of the contact. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Miss Talbot," he said as she turned to go. She looked back. "You came a very long way. I hope it is worth it." "I intend to make sure it is," she said. She walked out of the Sunrise Saloon into the Kansas evening, and behind her, Jasper Ford sat for a long moment looking at the door she had gone through, at the space her presence had occupied, at the faint revolution happening inside him that he was not yet prepared to name. The Double F Ranch in the summer of 1882 was a hard, beautiful, demanding place. It sat on a broad stretch of South Kansas grassland, where the prairie ran out flat and golden in every direction under a sky so enormous. It sometimes felt like the land was the bottom of a shallow bowl, and the blue above was the infinite depth of something else entirely. The ranch house was built from timber hauled up from Arkansas, solid, practical, nothing decorative about it except for the covered porch that ran the full length of the front, which suggested that whoever built it had understood that sitting outside in the evening was not a luxury, but a necessity for maintaining one's sanity on the open range. The cattle barns were well constructed. The corrals were in good repair. The bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept was crowded but functional. The east room of the main house, which was Kate's, had a bed, a washstand, a window facing the morning sun, and a wooden hook on the back of the door. It was the most basic accommodation she had ever occupied, and she found that after the confined, constrained years in St. Louis, it felt oddly like freedom. Chet Briggs was exactly what Jasper had implied, and then some. He was a lean, weathered man of about 40 with a permanent squint that gave him the look of someone perpetually ready to find fault with whatever they were examining. He had been with the Double F for 6 years, and considered himself the essential machinery around which the whole operation turned. The arrival of Kate Talbot, a young woman from the East with a leather bag full of instruments and the audacity to speak about cattle disease with authority, registered in Chet Briggs the way a cold morning registers in an arthritic joint, as an offense, and a painful one. He did not say anything offensive directly in the first week. He was too clever for that. What he did instead was ignore her suggestions until the damage became visible, assign her tasks that were either beneath her skill level or designed to exhaust her physically, and make quiet comments to the ranch hands that she was not in the room to hear, but that she was perfectly aware of because the ranch hands' behavior changed subtly after each conversation with Chet. Kate cataloged all of this carefully and said nothing. What she did instead was work. She rose before sunrise. She was in the barn before the hands finished their breakfast. She did every physical task assigned to her without complaint, even the ones clearly designed to be punitive, because she understood that being seen to do the work without complaint was more powerful than any argument. She established the quarantine area for the sick cattle on the first day, and within 48 hours, the animals showed the first signs of improvement under her treatment protocol. She conducted a full herd inspection over 3 days, working methodically through every animal, and identified 7 more cattle with early tick infestation. She treated them. She formulated the kerosene and lard wash with the precision of someone who had done it before, adjusted for the current temperature and the condition of the animal's skin, and applied it with the help of 2 ranch hands who had been reluctantly assigned to her by Chet. By the end of the first week, those 2 ranch hands, a young man named Tommy Delgado, 19 years old and the son of a Mexican vaquero who had once ranched in South Texas, and an older man named Roy Pierce who had 30 years on the range behind him, were no longer reluctant. Roy in particular, who had been quietly skeptical in the particular way of men who have seen a great deal and trust very little, had watched Kate work with a narrowing attention that eventually became something close to respect. "You know what you are doing," he said to her one evening, not as a question. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." He nodded once as if something had been confirmed rather than established, and went back to his work. Jasper Ford watched all of this. He was not, by nature, a man who hovered. He ran the business end of the ranch from the main house. The finances, the contracts with cattle buyers in Kansas City, the paperwork for the land grants and water rights that were perpetually contested in this part of the territory, and he left the day-to-day range operations to his people. But he was present on the range every day for some part of it, because he was also not a man who managed from a distance when he could see things directly, and in those daily hours he watched Kate with a growing attention that he told himself was purely professional. He watched her move through the herd with the ease of someone who belonged there. He watched her examine animals with her hands and eyes, and some quality of attention that was almost like listening. He watched her explain things to the ranch hands in a way that was clear and precise and entirely free of condescension, which was rarer than it should have been. He watched Chet Briggs's hostility wash off her the way rain washes off oilskin, leaving her not unaffected. He could see in the tightening around her eyes that it cost her something, but unbowed. He realized at the end of the second week, deeply impressed. He had hired people with years of experience who had not done this well this fast. He had hired men with credentials and references, and the kind of effortless confidence that looked like competence, until you watched it applied to actual problems. Kate Talbot had arrived with nothing but her name and her knowledge, and she was demonstrating both to be worth considerably more than he had dared to hope. He had not expected to find her beautiful. Not in the way he found her beautiful, which was not the simple, decorative beauty of a well-made thing, but something that came from watching a person operate at the full capacity of their intelligence and capability. She was physically striking, certainly dark-haired, clear-eyed, with the kind of bone structure that photographs well and the kind of expression that was rarely still. But what caught at him in the odd, inconvenient way that emotions catch at men who have deliberately kept themselves from them was the quality of her mind. The way she thought. The directness of it, the absence of evasion or performance, the way she said what she meant with a precision that he had encountered in very few people. He was careful with it. He was a careful man by nature and more so by experience. There was a dark past behind him that had taught him the price of being incautious with feeling, though that was a story he kept locked away in a place he did not visit often. He told himself that his attention to Kate Talbot was professional appreciation, and he was almost convincing about it. She was aware of his attention in the same precise way she was aware of most things. She catalogued it, considered what it meant, and filed it under not relevant to current priorities, which was a category she had developed specifically for inconvenient truths. She had not come west to be attracted to her employer. She had come west to work, to prove something, to build something that was hers. Jasper Ford was a means to that end. He was also, and this was the inconvenient truth part, one of the most genuinely interesting men she had ever encountered, and she had encountered a considerable number of men in her 24 years of determined, relentless effort to be taken seriously by them. It was the end of the third week that the trouble with Chet Briggs came to a head, and it was also, though neither of them knew it yet, the week that everything between Kate and Jasper stopped being something they could manage by filing it away. It started with a horse. One of the Double F's prize mares, a bay by the name of Duchess, 5 years old and carrying her first foal, had been showing signs of distress for 2 days. She was restless, repeatedly lying down and rising, sweating at the neck and flanks, showing colicky behavior. The ranch hands had told Chet, who had told them to let the animal settle and she would sort herself out. Kate had been in the south pasture doing a follow-up inspection on the recovering sick cattle when Roy came to find her, and the look on his face told her something was wrong before he spoke. "Briggs won't call for the Wichita vet," Roy said. "Says the mare will be fine, but she is not fine, Miss Talbot. She has been down 3 times in the past hour." Kate put down her equipment immediately and ran. Duchess was in a bad state. She was in her stall, soaked with sweat, her breathing labored and irregular, her belly distended on the right side in a way that Kate recognized with a cold, dropping sensation in her stomach. This was not colic. This was displacement. The large intestine had shifted out of its normal position, a condition known in veterinary literature as a large colon displacement, and it was one of the most dangerous acute abdominal emergencies a horse could suffer. Without intervention, the animal would die within hours, possibly less. Chet was standing at the stall door with his arms crossed when Kate arrived. "I am taking charge of this animal's care," Kate said. She said it without looking at him, already on her knees next to Duchess, her hands moving over the horse's abdomen with practiced certainty. You are not authorized to, Chet began. This horse is going to die in approximately 4 hours if nothing is done, Kate said, still without looking at him. If she dies, she takes the foal with her. That is one of Mr. Ford's prize mares, and one of the foals he was counting on for next season's sale. I have dealt with large colon displacement before. I know what to do. You can stand there arguing about my authorization, or you can get out of the way and let me save this animal. I genuinely do not care which you choose, but I am starting now. There was a silence behind her, then the sound of boots on packed earth as Chet moved. Tommy, Kate said, I need warm water, about 5 gallons. Roy, I need you in here to help me keep her calm, and someone needs to get Mr. Ford. What followed was 2 of the hardest hours of Kate's professional life. The treatment for a large colon displacement in a horse involved a process of careful physical manipulation, combined with walking the animal and controlled positioning, to attempt to return the colon to its correct location, without surgery on a pregnant mare in a barn without proper facilities, was a last resort that Kate was trying to avoid. She worked without stopping, speaking constantly to Duchess in a low, steady voice, her hands and arms doing work that required physical strength she had built over years of exactly this kind of labor, her mind calculating and recalculating with each response from the animal. Jasper arrived 20 minutes in. He stood at the stall entrance and watched. He did not speak. He understood immediately, in the way practical people understand the absolute concentration of someone doing critical work, that speaking would be wrong. He stayed, and he watched, and what he saw was something that stripped away every remaining pretense he had been maintaining about the nature of his feelings. Kate Talbot was saving his horse. Not with luck or blind effort, but with knowledge and skill and a physical capability, and an absolute command of a situation that would have rattled many experienced men to pieces. Her face was set, her jaw tight, her eyes completely focused. She had rolled up her sleeves and her arms were streaked with sweat, and she did not look elegant or composed, and she was the most competent person he had ever watched work in his entire life. An hour and 40 minutes after Kate began, Duchess shifted. The displacement corrected. The mare's breathing changed immediately, deeper, slower, the terrible laboring quality gone from it. Duchess put her head down against Kate's shoulder with the exhausted trust of an animal that has been through an ordeal and come out on the other side. Kate sat back on her heels and let out a breath that she had possibly been holding, in one way or another, for nearly 2 hours. She needs rest, monitoring, and light feed for 3 days, Kate said to the room generally. The foal appears unaffected. She should carry to term. She stood up, and she was shaking slightly in her hands in the way the body shakes when an enormous physical and mental effort releases its hold, and she made a small, involuntary gesture to brace herself against the stall wall. Jasper was across the barn in 3 strides. He did not touch her. He stopped just at the edge of touching her, his hand out but not quite making contact, a question in the gesture. She looked at him. Her eyes, meeting his, were clearer than anything he had seen. I am fine, she said, just the aftermath of it. I know, he said. I know you are. They were very close. The barn was warm and smelled of horses and hay and the particular earthy closeness of an enclosed space, and the ranch hands had quietly found other places to be, and there was no one watching except Duchess, who was past caring. You were extraordinary, he said. He said it quietly, but with a directness that matched hers, the same absence of performance in it, a simple truth stated simply. I have never, in 20 years of running this ranch, seen anyone work the way you just worked. Kate was quiet for a moment. Something in her expression moved, a brief fracturing of the professional composure, a flash of something underneath it that was less certain than what she showed the world. It mattered, she said. That is all. When something matters, you do not hold back. No, he agreed softly. You do not. The moment held itself between them, fragile and real, and then both of them stepped back from it by unspoken agreement because neither of them was ready yet. But both of them carried it with them out of the barn and into the evening, and both of them knew that something had changed. The situation with Chet Briggs resolved itself the following morning. Jasper called him into the main house, and Kate was not privy to the conversation, but Roy told her later with quiet satisfaction that Chet had been informed. He would report to Kate Talbot on all matters of livestock health and management, and that if this arrangement was unacceptable, his wages would be settled that afternoon and he was free to seek employment elsewhere. Chet stayed. He did not become pleasant about it, but he became functional, which was all Kate required of him. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the rhythm of the double F that was both practical and something else, something harder to name, and not yet named by either of the two people at the center of it. Kate's management of the herd transformed the ranch's health outcomes visibly. The infected cattle recovered fully. The quarantine held. The rest of the herd remained healthy. She established new rotation protocols for the pastures, introduced a systematic vaccination schedule for the diseases she could address, and organized the farrier schedule with an efficiency that the previous management had never attempted. The ranch hands, even those who had initially been hostile to the idea of her, gradually, one by one, came around. Not because she had charmed them or made herself palatable, but because they watched her work and they were practical people, and they recognized what was in front of them. Jasper Ford, for his part, began to find reasons to be in her vicinity that were not strictly necessary. This was unlike him. He was a man of deliberate action, not impulsive proximity. He had been since the death of his wife 4 years ago, the dark past he did not visit, the locked room, a man who operated at a careful distance from intimacy of any kind. Not coldly. He was not a cold man, but carefully, with the precision of someone who knows how easily things break when you are careless with them. His wife's name had been Clara. She had died of childbed fever in the summer of 1878, along with the infant son who had not survived his first 2 hours. Jasper had buried them both on a hill at the south edge of the double F, where a single cottonwood tree grew, and he had built the ranch in the years since with a focus and an intensity that was partly ambition and partly something else. The channeling of grief into action, the way some men carry their dead forward by building monuments out of the living present. He had not spoken of Clara to Kate. He was not ready for that. But he was aware, with increasing difficulty in ignoring it, that Kate Talbot was doing something to the edges of those locked places, not forcing them, not even pressing against them particularly, simply existing with a vitality and a substance that made the distance he had been keeping feel, for the first time in 4 years, like a choice rather than a necessity. The evenings were the most dangerous part. The ranch house porch faced west, and the Kansas sunsets in the summer of 1882 were something that a person could not witness without feeling the scale of the world, the particular combination of humility and exhilaration that comes from beauty too large to contain. Jasper had taken to sitting on the porch in the hour after dinner, a habit he had maintained for years in solitude. Kate had begun sitting there too, not by any particular invitation, simply because it was the right place to be at the right time of day, and Jasper had not suggested otherwise. They talked. This was the part he had not anticipated, not the attraction which he had expected himself to manage, but the conversation. They talked about cattle ranching and veterinary science, and the changes coming to the frontier. They talked about the economics of the beef industry, and the railroad's effects on the range cattle trade, and the brutal reality of the conflicts between ranchers and the farming homesteaders moving into the territory with their barbed wire, and their different vision of what the land was for. They talked about the Osage and Cheyenne and the profound, ongoing injustice of the reservation system that was dismantling cultures and confining peoples to decreasing parcels of land that had been promised and promised and promised and never truly given. Kate spoke about this with a directness that he appreciated. She did not perform outrage about it. She simply named it for what it was, a betrayal repeated systematically, a forced choice imposed on people who had been given no other options. Jasper had Osage neighbors on the western edge of the territory whom he dealt with in honest trade, and he knew what she meant. They talked about St. Louis and what she had left behind, and once, just once, in the third week of their evening conversations, he said enough about Clara that Kate understood what he was not saying, and she did not press him, but she also did not look away. And there was something in that, in being seen without the conversation having to be finished, that undid something in him slowly and carefully, the way a careful hand loosens a knot that a rough one would tighten. It was on an evening in late August, nearly 2 months after Kate's arrival at the Double F, that the hidden motive behind a different set of events came to light and nearly destroyed everything. A man named Gerald Purcell rode onto the Double F on a Tuesday afternoon, and he arrived with information that was designed to be a trap. Purcell was a cattle broker from Kansas City who had been attempting to purchase a portion of the Double F's grazing rights for 2 years. Jasper had refused him twice. What Purcell had discovered through means that were legally available but morally questionable was that Kate Talbot had left St. Louis under circumstances that could be made to look deeply compromising. The circumstances were these. Kate had been employed briefly as an assistant to a St. Louis livestock broker named Edward Marsh in the year before she came west. Marsh had been involved in fraudulent cattle grading, representing infected or substandard animals as prime stock, and selling them to buyers in Chicago and Kansas City at inflated prices. Kate had discovered what he was doing, had reported it to the Missouri Livestock Commission, and had been dismissed from her position by Marsh as a result. Marsh had then attempted to protect himself by filing a counter-complaint alleging that Kate had been complicit in the fraud. The commission had investigated and ultimately cleared Kate completely. The complaint against her had been dismissed. Marsh had eventually faced censure, though escaped criminal prosecution due to the involvement of several prominent men who had preferred the matter handled quietly. But the complaint existed. The record of it existed. And in the hands of someone like Purcell, who had come to the Double F with the specific purpose of driving out the woman who had reorganized Jasper's operation so effectively that Jasper's cattle were now the healthiest in the county, and his prices at market had risen accordingly. That record could be made to look like something it was not. Purcell sat in Jasper's office in the main house and laid out the documented summary of the complaint against Kate Talbot with the careful, practiced neutrality of someone who has rehearsed the performance of reluctant disclosure. He said he felt it was his duty, as a fellow businessman, to make Jasper aware of the risk he was carrying in the form of his livestock manager. He left the papers on the desk. Kate did not know any of this happened. She was at the south pasture when Purcell arrived, and she was still there when Purcell left. What she knew was that when she came in for the evening and walked onto the porch, Jasper was there, but the quality of his silence was different. Closed in a way that it had not been for weeks, she sat down. She waited. She had learned that he spoke in his own time and that waiting for it was the right approach. He told her eventually, in a flat voice that was the voice of a man trying to hold his own response at arm's length, what Purcell had brought him. Kate was quiet for a long moment after he finished. The evening sky was turning its deep copper and violet, and the grassland moved in the wind, and somewhere a coyote called from a long way off. The complaint was investigated and dismissed, she said. I know what the paper says, he said. I read it. Then you know that I reported the fraud. That I am the reason it came to light at all. I know what the paper says, he said again, and there was something in it, a flatness that was not accusation but not trust either, the careful closing down of someone retreating from a place they had been standing too close to, that cut her more sharply than she had been prepared for. She felt the betrayal of it, the specific, familiar sting of having done the right thing and being asked to defend it anyway, having gone further and further out on the limb of honesty, only to be handed the very branch she had been standing on as evidence against her. She had felt this before. She had felt it every time a door closed in St. Louis, every time a credential was denied, every time someone looked at Kate Talbot's excellent correspondence and went cold when they learned what the K stood for. She stood up. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Ford," she said, and her voice was quiet but entirely steady, and every word she meant. "I have spent 10 years doing work that I have had to fight for the right to do. I have been accused of things I did not do by men who were trying to protect themselves from the consequences of things they actually did. I have been cleared. Formally, officially cleared. The record you are looking at is incomplete, and I suspect the man who brought it to you knew it was incomplete and brought it anyway because he wants to break up what I have built here. And if you are the kind of man who lets that work," she stopped. She took a breath. "Then I was wrong about you, and I am rarely wrong about people." She went inside. She shut her door. She did not slam it. Jasper sat on the porch for a very long time. He was not. By the time darkness had fully settled and the stars had come out over the Kansas prairie in their staggering, unobstructed brilliance, uncertain about what she had told him. He had read the complete record, all of it, including the dismissal of the complaint and the commission's notes, and he was not a fool. He knew what it said. He also knew, in the way he knew things about people when he watched them carefully and honestly, exactly what kind of woman Kate Talbot was. What he was uncertain about was himself. About the fact that his first response to the information Purcell had brought had been to go cold and distant, to reach for distance the way he always reached for it when something mattered too much. He had used Purcell's dubious document as an excuse to pull back, and he had done it so instinctively that he had not even recognized it until she had named it with that quiet, devastating precision. He went to her door. He knocked. She opened it after a moment. She had changed into her night clothes, a simple cotton shirt and skirt, and her hair was down, and the lamplight from inside the room was behind her, and she looked at him with the particular, exhausted clarity of someone who has done the emotional work already and is waiting to see whether the other person will do theirs. "I am sorry," he said. "Not the kind of sorry that is just words. I was using it as a reason to back away from something that I am." He stopped. He was not practiced at this. The words were difficult in the way of things that have been kept quiet a long time. "I am afraid of," he finished. She looked at him for a long moment. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. "Caring about someone who will leave," he said, "or be taken," or he exhaled. "Clara was, you do not have to tell me tonight," she said. "I think I do," he said. "I think if I do not tell you tonight, I will find another reason not to tell you tomorrow, and then another one after that, and I will have talked myself back behind the wall before I've had the chance to understand what being outside of it feels like." She stepped back from the door. It was an invitation, and a serious one, and they both knew it. He came inside and sat in the single wooden chair, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and he told her about Clara, about the summer of 1878, about the cottonwood tree on the South Hill, about the 4 years of building the double F into something worth having while carrying a grief he had not allowed himself to fully set down because setting it down meant acknowledging that the weight had been the point. The weight had been the way he continued to be present with what he had lost. When he finished, the room was quiet and Kate was looking at him with those clear, dark eyes, and she said, "She sounds like someone who would have wanted you to be happy." He looked at the floor. "Yes," he said, "she would have." "And you have spent 4 years being excellent instead." "Yes. Excellent is not a substitute," Kate said, "though it is a better choice than most people make." He looked up at her. "You are the most honest person I have ever met," he said, "including myself." "That is because I have had to be," she said. "Honesty was always the only currency I had that nobody could take away from me. I am not going to stop spending it now." He stood up. There was a quality to the room, to the two of them in it, that was held breath, the moment between lightning and thunder. He crossed to where she was sitting on the edge of the bed, and he took her hand, not with urgency but with a care that was itself a kind of declaration. "Kate," he said, which was the first time he had used her given name, and the way he said it with the reverence of someone saying a word they have been waiting to be allowed to use made her breath change. "Jasper," she said back, testing it. It fit her mouth. He pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gentle thing, formal and tender all at once, the kind of gesture that belongs to a man who has been raised in one era and is finding his way into another one and wants to do it right. She covered his hand with her free one. "Not tonight," she said quietly. "Not because I do not want to, but because I think we should do this carefully." "Agreed," he said immediately, without any of the resistance that a lesser man might have had. He meant it. He did not want to rush what he was just beginning to understand was the most significant thing that had happened to him in a very long time. He straightened up. He held her hand for one more moment. Then he let it go. "Good night, Kate," he said. "Good night," she said. "And for the record, I know you are not the kind of man who would let Purcell's tactics work. I think you knew it the moment I walked back inside. I think you came here because you knew it and wanted me to know it too." He was almost to the door. He looked back over his shoulder. "You are, as I have previously mentioned," he said, "extraordinarily perceptive." She smiled. It was a genuine one, wide and warm and briefly unguarded, and it was the first time he had seen it without anything held back, and it went straight through him. He left. He went back to the porch. He sat down, and he looked at the stars, and he was aware of something opening up inside him that had been closed for a very long time, something tentative and real and precious in the way of things that exist in the unguarded places. The autumn came to the Kansas prairie with the particular beauty of a thing that knows it will not last. The grassland went from gold to bronze, and the mornings came in cold and sharp, and the sky turned a deeper, cleaner blue that only existed when the heat had gone out of it. The cattle settled into their late-season routine, the calves fattening toward winter, the bulls withdrawn and quiet, the whole herd taking on the slow, measured rhythm of a season of consolidation rather than growth. Kate and Jasper moved toward each other with the same unhurried care, the same patience, as if both of them understood that what was growing between them was worth doing slowly. There were evenings on the porch that stretched later and later into the dark, the conversation ranging farther and the silences growing more comfortable. There were mornings where they rode the range together, checking fences and water sources, and the ease that developed in those shared hours was a kind of intimacy in itself. There were small gestures, a cup of coffee brought without asking, a lamp left burning late, a jacket offered against the evening chill with an undemonstrative naturalness that accumulated like stones building a foundation. Roy Pierce, who was not a sentimental man, told Tommy Delgado one afternoon that something had shifted in the way the ranch ran, and it was not just the cattle health. Tommy, who was 20 and therefore paying close attention to precisely this kind of thing, said, "It is because they are falling in love." Roy was quiet for a moment. "That is probably true," he said. What Roy and Tommy did not see, what was happening in the space between Kate and Jasper that was not visible from the outside, was the accumulated weight of understanding. The way she told him about the years of closed doors, the refused credentials, the letters signed with initials to hide her gender, the constant navigation of a world that was built for people who were not her. The way he listened without offering to fix it, without becoming defensive on behalf of his gender, without any of the performed discomfort that men used to avoid the discomfort of honest accounting. He simply listened and asked questions that showed he had heard, and occasionally said, with a quiet anger that was not directed at her but on her behalf, "That should not have been how it was." And she told him about Edward Marsh, the full story this time with all the detail. Fraudulent grading scheme, her discovery of it, her decision to report it, the counter-complaint designed to discredit her, the investigation that cleared her but could not fully undo the damage Marsh had done to her professional standing in St. Louis, which was part of why she had left for Kansas. Jasper was quiet for a long time after she told him. "You did the right thing," he said finally. It cost you significantly and you did it anyway. Doing the wrong thing was also an option, she said. A lot of people chose it. Marsh had partners who kept quiet, buyers who looked the other way, men at the commission who preferred a quiet settlement to a proper investigation. I chose differently. I know, he said. That is not a surprise to me. You barely know me, she said. I have watched you work for 2 months, he said. I know exactly who you are. The directness of it, the simple certainty of it, landed in her chest in a way she was not entirely prepared for. Jasper, she said. Kate, he said, and then, because the evening was cool and the stars were out and 4 years of careful distance had done their honest work and were no longer needed, he reached over in the dark of the porch and took her hand and kept it. She leaned slightly against his shoulder. He was solid and warm, and he did not make a performance of it, simply allowed it, turned his head slightly so that his cheek rested briefly against the top of her head, an acknowledgement. They sat like that for a long time in the dark, with the prairie breathing around them. 2 weeks later, he kissed her for the first time. It happened in the barn, of all the unromantic locations, in the late afternoon while they were checking on Duchess, who was now 7 weeks from her foaling date and enormously, contentedly pregnant. Jasper had been watching Kate examine the mare, and had been saying something about the foal, and had then stopped speaking mid-sentence because Kate had looked up at him from where she was crouched beside the horse, and the late afternoon light from the barn door was on her face, and something in him simply gave way. He crossed the distance between them with 3 steps and cupped her face in both his hands, which were large and rough against her skin, and he looked at her for a moment with an expression that was entirely undone and entirely honest, and had nothing held back in it. And she said nothing, only looked back at him with those clear dark eyes, and then he kissed her. It was unhurried, careful, deeply deliberate, a kiss that said everything that 2 people who had been talking around what they meant for weeks finally said directly. She kissed him back with the same directness that characterized everything about her, her hands coming up to his chest, and Duchess snorted behind them with what seemed like a pinion. They broke apart. Kate laughed first, a genuine laugh, surprised out of her, warm and real. Jasper's face, which she had never seen fully unguarded before, was the face of a man at the beginning of something good. I have wanted to do that, he said, for approximately 6 weeks. 8, she said, though I am not counting, he laughed. It was deep and unhurried, the laugh of a man who laughs genuinely when he does. She stored it away in the precise part of her that catalogued important things, to be retrieved and examined later, or simply kept. Gerald Purcell made one more attempt. This one was a different kind of trap, more direct and considerably more dangerous than the document he had presented previously. In late October, he filed a formal complaint with the Sumner County Land Commission, alleging that the Double F's water rights were being improperly maintained, and that the ranch had been running cattle on disputed grazing land. The complaint was legally frivolous. Jasper's land and water rights were impeccably documented, a fact that any competent lawyer could establish in a day, but the process of defending against it would be time-consuming, expensive, and potentially interfere with the winter preparations that were critical for the herd's survival. Jasper received the notice on a Monday morning and was tight-lipped and controlled about it in the way he was tight-lipped and controlled when something made him genuinely angry. Kate sat across the office table from him and read the complaint carefully. Then she read the deed documentation he showed her. Then she looked up. His grazing land claim is based on a survey error from 1878, she said. The original survey of this property was conducted by the Murray Survey Team. In 1879, the Federal Land Office issued a correction notice about Murray survey errors in this county specifically, because Murray had been using an incorrect baseline reference. The correction notice confirmed that the corrected surveys superseded all property claims based on the Murray data. Purcell's complaint cites the Murray survey. If your deed was filed under the corrected survey, and I would bet everything I own that it was, because you are far too careful a man to have missed that, his entire claim is based on data that was officially invalidated 3 years ago." Jasper stared at her. He opened his deed file. He found the survey reference. He looked at the number. He looked back at Kate. "How do you know about the Murray survey error?" he asked. "Because when I was preparing to come to Kansas, I read everything I could find about land ownership and livestock operation in this territory," she said. "The Murray correction was in the Federal Land Office Bulletin of 1879. I read it because I wanted to understand the legal landscape as well as the physical one." He was looking at her with that expression again, the one that was deeply, genuinely, wholly impressed, the kind of impression that cannot be performed and cannot be manufactured, that comes from watching someone be more than you already knew they were and being completely taken aback by it. "You came here with a leather bag and $43, he said. "And my name," she said. "And enough knowledge to run this ranch legally, medically, and apparently survivorially," he said. "Survivorially is not a word," she said. "I am making it one," he said. He took the deed file and the Murray correction notice to his lawyer in Caldwell the following morning. The complaint was dismissed within 2 weeks. Purcell did not make another attempt. On the day the dismissal notice arrived, Jasper rode back from Caldwell in the early afternoon, and Kate was in the north pasture doing a late-season check on the herd, and he found her there and told her, and she took the news with the calm, satisfied quality of someone who already knew what the outcome would be. He dismounted from his horse and stood in the pasture next to her, and the autumn sun was on the grass turning it to copper, and the cattle moved slowly around them in that bovine way that was entirely indifferent to human drama. "I need to ask you something," Jasper said. She waited. She had learned the shape of his silences, and this was the shape of one that mattered. "I know you came here to work," he said. "I know that is what this was at the beginning. And I know that what it has become is that it has changed, for me at least." "For me also," she said quietly. "What I am asking," he said, looking at her steadily with those storm-gray eyes, "is whether you would consider staying." Not as the livestock manager of the Double F as my he stopped. He was not a man who had practiced this sentence, she realized. The word he was reaching for was one he had not said in 4 years, and it was stuck. "I would consider it extremely seriously," she said, while he was still reaching for the word. "I would, in fact, require very little convincing." He exhaled a breath that carried 4 years in it. "Kate Talbot," he said. "Jasper Ford," she said. "Will you marry me?" he said. She looked at him across the copper-lit grass of the Kansas autumn, this man who had given her work when the rest of the world had given her closed doors, who had seen her for what she was rather than what he expected her to be, who had been afraid and honest about being afraid and had crossed the distance anyway. "Yes," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "I keep my work," she said. "I am not becoming a rancher's wife who embroiders and waits. I am becoming your partner in all of it. The cattle, the land, the decisions, all of it together. That was always the only version I was considering," he said. She stepped toward him and he met her halfway, and when he kissed her in the north pasture with the cattle watching and the autumn sun declining toward the western edge of the world, it tasted like everything she had carried with her from St. Louis, and everything she had found here and everything she had yet to build. They were married in Caldwell on the 15th of November, 1882, in the small clapboard Methodist church at the end of the main street, with Roy Pierce as one witness and a local woman named Agnes Crow, the schoolteacher who had befriended Kate over the course of her monthly trips to town, as the other. Tommy Delgado stood outside the church door and wept openly, which he later denied. Kate wore her best dress, which was a dark blue wool she had brought from St. Louis, and which she had altered herself to fit the more active life she had been living, and she carried a small bunch of late-season prairie wildflowers that Jasper had gotten up before dawn to find for her because he had remembered, in a conversation weeks earlier, that she had mentioned them as something she found beautiful. She noticed the flowers, understood immediately the effort they represented, and felt the precision of being known in the small things, the way you feel the warmth of a fire after cold. Jasper in his best suit was still entirely himself, still broad and solid and unhurried, still carrying that particular quality of physical presence that said he had no need to announce himself, because he was simply here, fully here, with all of himself in the room. He looked at her when she walked through the church door, and his expression was the one she had been collecting, the unguarded one, the one with nothing held back, and she held it in the clear, cataloging part of her that kept the things that mattered. The minister was brief and direct, and they said the words they meant, and then they were married. And outside the church the November wind was cold and clean, and the prairie stretched out in every direction under a sky that was the deep blue of late autumn. And it was the freest Kate Talbot, Kate Ford. Now, though she kept Talbot professionally because it was hers and she was keeping it, had ever felt. The winter that followed was the first winter of Kate's life, that she had spent entirely engaged with what she was doing in a way that left no room for the particular restlessness that had characterized her years in St. Louis. The double F in winter was a demanding, enclosed, intensely physical world. Caring for 800 cattle in Kansas cold was not a passive operation. The animals needed additional feed, constant water source management since the creek iced over in December, shelter management, and vigilant health monitoring, because the cold brought its own set of respiratory illnesses in the younger animals. Kate managed it with the same systematic thoroughness that had characterized everything she did, and she did it with Jasper at her side as a genuine partner rather than a supervisor or an employer. He was an outstanding rancher in all the ways she was not, in the physical management of the land, the fencing, the water infrastructure, the relationship with the neighboring ranchers that required a kind of sustained social diplomacy she had never needed to develop. Where he was methodical and practical, she was precise and analytical. Where she brought new knowledge and novel approaches, he brought 20 years of accumulated direct experience with this specific land and climate and market. Together, they were considerably more effective than either of them alone, and both of them knew it. The intimacy of shared work, it turned out, was the deepest kind. More intimate than the evenings on the porch, more intimate than anything else, to work alongside someone at full capacity, to see them solve problems and face difficulties, and make decisions under pressure, to be seen doing the same, was to know someone in the most complete possible way. Duchess foaled in January, a healthy bay colt that stood within the hour and nursed with the aggressive energy of an animal that intended to be fine. Kate delivered the foal herself at 3 in the morning with Jasper beside her holding the lamp, and when it was done and the colt was standing on his new, uncertain legs, she sat back against the stall wall and laughed the same surprised, genuine laugh she had laughed in the barn in the autumn. And Jasper sat down beside her in the straw and put his arm around her, and they sat together in the warm, lamplit barn, while the New Year's first hours wore on outside. "I think we should call him Murray," Kate said. "After the survey error that saved the ranch," Jasper laughed. "We are absolutely calling him Murray," he agreed. Spring came back to the prairie with its particular urgency, the grass greening overnight after a warm rain, the cattle moving with new restlessness, the whole enormous enterprise of the natural world starting its cycle again. With spring came the calving season, which Kate managed with a precision and a hands-on commitment that had the hands working harder than they had ever worked in calving season before, but with considerably fewer losses. The survival rate for that year's calf crop at the Double F was the highest it had ever been by a significant margin, and when the numbers came in at the end of the season, Jasper set them on the table and looked at Kate across the breakfast coffee and said, simply, "You have transformed this ranch." "We have," she said. "You are being generous." "I am being accurate," she said. "Land does not heal itself. Cattle do not manage themselves. The management protocol is mine. The land, the capital, the relationships, the infrastructure, those are yours. Neither of us has this without the other." "I know," he said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. That is precisely what I wanted to say. In May of 1883, Kate wrote a long letter to her mother that began, "I am going to tell you something that will surprise you, and something else that will not surprise you at all." The thing that would not surprise Eleanor Talbot was that her daughter had turned a failing livestock operation into the most consistently healthy cattle ranch in Sumner County within a year of her arrival. The thing that would surprise her was the rest of it. The ring on Kate's finger and the name Ford added to her own, and the particular, enormous contentment of a person who has found not just work they are meant to do, but a life they are meant to live. Eleanor wrote back a letter that was 3 pages long and contained, midway through the second page, the sentence, "I always knew you would find your way to what you were built for. I simply did not know it would involve 800 cattle and a man in Kansas." It made Kate laugh for a long time. She showed Jasper the letter. He read it, and something in his face went soft in the way it did sometimes, unexpectedly, when she showed him something real about herself. "I want to meet her," he said. "She wants to meet you," Kate said. I believe her exact words were, "He had better be worth the trouble of Kansas," which from my mother is practically a warm welcome. "I am going to do my best to be worth the trouble of Kansas," he said. Eleanor Talbot came to the Double F in the summer of 1883, on the same Missouri-Kansas-Texas line that Kate had ridden west on the year before, and she stepped off the stage at Caldwell, a woman in her 50s who bore a considerable resemblance to her daughter in the clarity of her eyes and the directness of her manner, and an absolute absence of any willingness to be anything other than exactly who she was. She looked at the Double F with the appraising eye of someone who kept books and had developed an eye for what was solid and what was performative, and then she looked at Jasper, and he met her gaze without flinching, because he was not the kind of man who flinched, and she said, "My daughter tells me you had 12 applications from experienced men and you hired her instead." "I hired the best candidate," he said. "Indeed you did," Eleanor said. And that was, as it turned out, the entirety of her vetting process. She stayed 2 weeks, and by the end of them she had won Roy Pierce over by beating him at checkers 4 nights in a row, and had charmed Tommy Delgado completely by asking him seriously about his family in South Texas and listening to the answers with real attention. She had also, in the quiet evenings when Kate was occupied and she and Jasper sat on the porch, had conversations with him that Kate was not privy to, and which Eleanor never fully disclosed, except to say to Kate privately on her last evening, "He loves you the way you deserve to be loved, with his whole attention and without condition. I am satisfied." Kate had held her mother's hands in both of her own and said, "I know." "I know that." "Good," Eleanor said. "Then there is nothing more I need to say about it." The autumn of 1883 brought changes. Jasper had been in discussions with a cattle buyer from Kansas City named Harlan Pruitt, who was looking for a reliable year-round supply arrangement with a ranch that could guarantee the health and quality of its animals. A premium contract that would represent a significant financial step-up for the Double F. The negotiations had been proceeding for 2 months. And Kate had been involved in every meeting, because she was the one who could speak with absolute authority about the ranch's health protocols and what they could guarantee. Pruitt had come to the Double F himself to inspect the herd in October, and what he had seen had impressed him considerably. But the piece of the negotiation that had been in question was the guarantee clause. Pruitt wanted the Double F to guarantee a minimum health standard for every animal delivered, backed by a financial penalty if animals failed the Kansas City market inspector's review. Most ranchers would have balked at this. It was an unusual provision, and the financial exposure was real. Kate had spent 3 evenings with the numbers before she told Jasper what she thought. "We should accept it," she said. "The penalty exposure," he began, "is real but manageable, and here is why," she said. She laid out the health data from the past 18 months at the Double F, the infection rates, the mortality rates, the recovery outcomes, the foal and calf survival rates. She showed him what the numbers said about the trajectory they were on, and where she projected the herd health would be in another year under the existing protocols. She showed him the comparison against the county average. Our animals will pass inspection at a rate significantly above what the contract defines as the penalty threshold, she said. The guarantee is not an exposure for us. It is an advertisement. It says to every buyer in Kansas City that we are so confident in our product that we are willing to accept financial consequences if we are wrong. That confidence will command a premium price that more than offsets the theoretical penalty risk, which we are almost certainly never going to face. Jasper looked at the numbers for a long time. You have been building toward this for a year, he said. The health protocols, the quarantine systems, the vaccination schedules. You built them knowing this was the argument you would eventually be able to make. She had not, consciously. But when he said it, she realized it was true, that the direction of her work had been pointing here without her having explicitly named the destination. My mother says I plan in my sleep, she said. He signed the Prout contract. The first delivery under the new arrangement in the spring of 1884 passed the Kansas City market inspection with an outcome that Prout's own inspectors noted in writing was the best they had seen from a Kansas ranch in 5 years. Harlan Prout sent a letter to Jasper that was effusive in a way that businessmen in the cattle trade generally were not, and Jasper read it twice and then handed it to Kate without comment because no comment was necessary. In the spring of 1884, Kate discovered she was pregnant. She was not entirely surprised by this. She had been noticing the early signs for 2 weeks with the same methodical attention she paid to everything. But the reality of it, when she was fully certain, was different from the anticipation of it. She sat with it for a day by herself, turning it over in the careful part of her mind, feeling it also in the less careful part that was not analytical at all but simply human, and what she felt was a happiness that was uncomplicated in a way that most of her happiness had not been. She had spent 10 years fighting for her place in the world. This was not a fight. This was simply life adding itself to itself, and it was good. She told Jasper that evening on the porch after dinner, as the sun went down over the Kansas grassland in the particular way of spring sunsets that carry warmth in them again. He was very still when she told him. She watched him carefully, reading the stillness, and understood that he was managing something complicated, the joy of it and the fear of it, the shadow of 1878 lying across the present moment. She took his hand. I am healthy, she said. I am 26 years old. I have access to more information about managing a healthy pregnancy than most women in this territory. I am not going to repeat what happened to Clara, and I am not going to let you be afraid of this. He turned his hand over and gripped hers. I am afraid of this, he said. I am telling you honestly so that I do not carry it alone and let it become something that sits between us. I know, she said. And I am glad you are telling me. We carry it together. That is what we do. He pressed her hand to his lips. His eyes, when he looked at her over her knuckles, were the stormy gray of the sky before rain, and under the storm was something so clear and so open that it made her breath catch. Together, he said, she ensured there was medical care. She corresponded with her contacts from St. Louis veterinary and medical networks, and through those contacts, she arranged for an experienced midwife from Wichita, a woman named Mrs. Cora Halloway who had 30 years and several hundred successful deliveries behind her, to be engaged well in advance of the due date and to come to the Double F for the final weeks. Kate maintained her work through the pregnancy with modifications, staying off horses in the 3rd trimester and redirecting her energy toward the management and planning work that could be done from the office and the barn floor. She was not idle for a single day. On a morning in November of 1884, the 2nd November of their marriage, Kate Ford delivered a healthy son. The birth was long and difficult in the way of first births, and Mrs. Halloway was everything she had been represented to be, calm and capable and direct in the way Kate responded to best, and Jasper was in the house, because Kate had been entirely clear on the point that she was not going through this without him in the building. The baby was named Thomas William Ford Thomas for Tommy Delgado, who had been a faithful friend and a good hand since the beginning, and William for Jasper's father, who had given him the Double F land and had died the winter before Kate arrived. Thomas William Ford was a vigorous, loud, opinionated infant from the first hour, which Roy Pierce said was hardly surprising given his parentage, and Kate held him in the quiet of the bedroom, while the afternoon light came through the east window, and Jasper sat on the edge of the bed beside her with his son's small hand wrapped around his finger. And the grief of 1878 was present in the room, acknowledged and honored, and so was the present joy. And both things were true at once in the way that life makes room for when you allow it to. "Hello, Thomas," Kate said to her son, in the same low, steady voice she used with new animals, the voice of complete, unhurried attention. "You have come into a very good life, and we are going to do everything in our power to keep it that way." Thomas William Ford responded with an expression that was either profound contemplation or gas, and Kate laughed that warm, surprised laugh that Jasper stored carefully in his own collection of her. The Double F continued to grow. The Prout contract became the template for 2 more premium agreements with Kansas City buyers over the following years. Kate's health protocols became, quietly and gradually, a reference point for other ranchers in the county who were dealing with disease issues and had noticed the consistent quality of the Double F herd. She did not set up a formal consulting practice. That was several years beyond what the current frontier culture would easily support, but she answered questions openly when they were asked, because she was not interested in keeping the knowledge to herself. Knowledge did not diminish when it was shared. It grew. In the spring of 1886, Kate sent a paper to the American Veterinary Review, the professional journal that was, by this time, beginning to accept submissions from women, reluctantly and rarely. The paper was titled Field Observations on Bovine Pyroplasmosis in Northern Range Cattle, Practical Management Protocols. It was 800 words, precise and direct and entirely practical, describing what she had learned and implemented at the Double F over 4 years of hands-on work with the disease. It drew on 3 cases in detail and presented the outcomes with exact figures. The editor wrote back 3 weeks later to say it would be published in the summer issue. Kate read the letter twice. Then she walked outside to where Jasper was working on the fence line at the near pasture. "It is being published," she said. He stopped what he was doing, he looked at her, he read the letter. He stood up and held her face in his hands and kissed her the way he had kissed her in the barn in the autumn of 1882, with everything in it, nothing held back. "Kate Talbot Ford," he said, "in print." "Under my own full name," she said. "Kate Elizabeth Talbot Ford, no initials." "Good," he said. "Your name deserves to be there." She leaned her forehead against his chest. He put his arms around her, and the spring prairie stretched out around them in every direction. And Thomas, now 18 months old and mobile in the alarming way of toddlers with opinions, was somewhere behind them being watched by Roy with an expression of increasing concern. A second child followed in 1887, a daughter this time, born in the deep cold of February, who arrived with considerably less difficulty than Thomas had, and with considerably more hair, and who was named Clara Rose Ford, after a woman who had mattered and who deserved to be remembered as something more than a loss. Jasper held his daughter the night she was born and stood at the window of the ranch house with the winter prairie dark and starlit outside, and Kate watched him from the bed where she was resting, and she saw him say something very quietly, to the child, or perhaps to the name, or perhaps to the past and the present simultaneously, and she understood what it meant without needing to hear it. Clara Rose was, from her earliest weeks, a child who took notice of everything, large dark eyes that tracked faces and lights and movement with an attention that was entirely her mother's, combined with an absolute social ease that was entirely her father's. Thomas, 23 months older, approached the new baby with the mixture of suspicion and possessive affection that characterized his general approach to things he was uncertain about. And by the time Clara was 6 weeks old, he had decided she was acceptable and began the earnest business of trying to teach her things she was physiologically incapable of doing. The double F in 1887 was not the same operation it had been in 1882. It was larger, healthier, better managed, and better known. The calf crop was consistently excellent. The premium contracts were solid. The ranch hands had changed over the years. Some had moved on. New ones had come, but Roy Pierce was still there, gray at the temples now and slower on his feet than he had been. And Tommy Delgado had married a woman from Caldwell named Lucinda and had a child of his own, a small son named Raphael, who spent time at the Double F often enough that Thomas had adopted him as a kind of honorary cousin. Chet Briggs had left in the winter of 1884, which no one had grieved very hard. He had found work at a smaller operation west of Caldwell. Kate heard occasionally through the county network of ranch-connected gossip that he still spoke with a certain bitter quality about women who thought they belonged in management, and she did not waste any energy on it. What she did waste considerable energy on, in the years following the publication of her paper, was the beginning of what became a sustained correspondence with veterinary researchers, both domestic and European, who had read her work and wanted to discuss it. The paper on Texas fever had been followed, in 1885, by a second one on respiratory illness management in range cattle, and in 1887 by a third on obstetric complications in cattle, with implications for foal delivery in horses. Each paper was received somewhat better than the last, partly because the work was excellent and partly because the frontier context in which she worked, a woman managing a large cattle operation and publishing field research simultaneously, was beginning to be, in certain intellectual circles, something regarded as genuinely remarkable rather than simply irregular. She did not regard it as remarkable. She regarded it as what she did. In the autumn of 1888, a letter arrived from the Iowa Agricultural College, which had recently established a veterinary program, asking whether Mrs. Kate Talbot Ford would be willing to speak to the program's students about practical livestock disease management. It was, the letter noted carefully, a formal professional invitation. She would be compensated for her time and travel. Kate read it at breakfast. She set it down on the table. She looked at Jasper. "Iowa," she said. "Is not as far as St. Louis," he said. "It is in the other direction." "It is a college invitation," he said. 10 years ago you were standing outside windows in the cold trying to hear lectures you were not permitted to attend. Now they are writing to invite you to give one." She picked the letter back up. "Read it again." "I would need to go for 2 weeks," she said. "The children will be fine," he said. "I am their father. I have managed cattle and hired hands for 20 years. I believe I can manage 2 weeks with Thomas and Clara. Thomas is 4 years old and has no respect for authority." "He gets that from you." "He absolutely does," she agreed. She wrote to the Iowa Agricultural College and accepted the invitation. She was 30 years old, and she stood in a lecture hall at Ames in November of 1888 and spoke to 30 veterinary students, all of them men, every one of them about field management of bovine pyroplasmosis based on 6 years of direct, hands-on research at the Double F Ranch in Kansas. And she spoke with such absolute authority and such precise, practical detail that by the end of the lecture the room was entirely still, with the particular attention of people who have understood that they are in the presence of someone who actually knows. The professor who had organized her visit shook her hand afterward and said, "I hope you will agree to a second visit." "I expect I will," she said. She came home to Kansas on a Thursday afternoon, and Thomas met her at the gate of the ranch at a run, which required her to crouch and catch him with both arms at full impact, and he talked continuously for approximately 20 minutes about everything that had happened while she was gone, and she held him and listened to every word. Clara, carried by Jasper, regarded her mother's return with the serene assessment of an 11-month-old, who was already accustomed to being the center of whatever room she was in, and had therefore decided to be gracious about sharing it. Jasper, after the children were settled for the evening, held her on the porch in the cold November dark with his arms around her from behind and his chin at the top of her head, and they looked at the stars over the Kansas prairie, the same stars that had been there on their first evening, the same enormous dark and the same unobstructed sky. "How was it?" he asked. "It was everything I worked for," she said, "and I was ready to come home." His arms tightened slightly. "Home," he said, as if the word had specific weight. "Here," she said, "you, the children, this ridiculous amount of cattle, Roy, Murray, who is now 2 years old and extremely pleased with himself, all of it." "Murray is a horse," he said. "He is not pleased with himself." "Murray is absolutely pleased with himself," she said. "You raised him on too much praise and now he knows it." He laughed, and she felt it in his chest against her back, and she closed her eyes and let herself simply be here, in this moment, in this life she had built from 400 miles of stagecoach and $43 and a leather bag of instruments and her name. The years that followed were full in the way that only good lives are full, not without difficulty, because the frontier was not without difficulty, and the cattle business was never without its cycles of abundance and shortage, and the children grew into people with strong opinions and their own ideas about the world, which required navigation. But they were full of the right things, full of work that mattered, full of evenings on the porch, full of the particular, irreplaceable satisfaction of a partnership between two people who saw each other clearly and chose each other anyway. The Double F expanded its land holdings in 1890, acquiring the adjacent property to the north when its owner retired and moved to his daughter's family in Missouri. This gave the ranch nearly double its original pasture capacity, and the years of careful pasture rotation that Kate had established meant that the new land was brought into a management system that was already functioning and could absorb the expansion without the chaos it might have created at a less organized operation. Kate's professional reputation in those years grew in the way of things that are built on genuine substance, quietly at first, then undeniably. The Iowa Agricultural College invited her back annually. In 1891, she was asked to contribute a chapter on disease management in range cattle to a textbook being assembled by a professor at Cornell, a landmark invitation that she accepted with the same matter-of-fact quality she brought to everything, though Jasper, who understood what it meant, was so proud of her that he told Roy, who then told Tommy, and word spread through the ranch with a warmth that Kate noticed and was, quietly, deeply moved by. In 1892, she discovered she was pregnant again, and this third pregnancy was different from the first two in that she was 34 and had been through 2 previous deliveries and had an entirely clear-eyed understanding of what was involved. She managed it with complete competence. Jasper was tender and attentive and carried the careful watchfulness of a man who had been through this twice before and understood the weight of it. But he was not afraid in the way he had been afraid the first time, because 4 years of watching Kate navigate the world had recalibrated his understanding of what she was capable of. The third child, born in November of 1892, was a son named James Roy Ford James for Jasper's brother who lived in Nebraska, and Roy for the man who had been at the Double F since before any of the rest of them, who was now gray-haired and slower but still there, still watching the pasture with the precise, skeptical attention of someone who has seen a great many things and trusts nothing until he has verified it himself. Roy, when he was told the middle name, was silent for a moment with the particular quality of a man who is feeling something he does not have the habit of displaying. "That is a fine name," he said finally. "He will earn it," Kate said. Roy looked at her with the same expression he had given her 6 years ago in a stall with a recovering horse, the expression of a man who has been proven right about something and is satisfied with it. "I expect he will," Roy said. "He has got decent people ahead of him." On an evening in the spring of 1893, Kate sat on the porch of the Double F with Jasper while Thomas, who was 9 years old and already fearless on a horse, was making an argument to his father about whether he could ride the north pasture fence line by himself. And Clara, who was 6 and possessed of her grandmother Eleanor's devastating precision of expression, was explaining to Tommy Delgado's son Raphael why he was wrong about something. And baby James was asleep inside under Lucia Delgado's watchful care. The sun went down over the Kansas prairie in the way it always went down, with the particular, generous extravagance of a country that has more sky than it knows what to do with, and Kate watched it and felt the cumulative weight of the years, the accumulated presence of everything she had made from nothing but her name and what she knew. "What are you thinking?" Jasper asked. He was beside her, his shoulder against hers, easy and familiar and warm. "I am thinking about a girl who stood outside a window in St. Louis in the cold," she said, listening to a lecture she was not permitted to attend, and what she would say if she could see this. "What would she say?" he asked. Kate was quiet for a moment. "She would say it was worth it," Kate said. "Every mile of it. Every closed door and every indignity and every hour of cold and every argument and every moment of doubt. She would say she is glad she came west with nothing but her name." Jasper took her hand. He held it the way he had held it on that first evening with that particular care, and he turned his head to look at her, and his eyes were the color of a storm that had already passed and left the sky washed clean behind it. "And what do I say about that name?" he asked. He was smiling. She looked at him, this man who had given her space to be everything she was, who had been shocked into depth by her competence and into love by her honesty, who had carried his grief forward with integrity and had been willing to set it down when she gave him ground to set it down on. "I remember," she said. "You said it was more than enough." "I did," he said. "I was right." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. And behind them, through the open door, the sounds of the house carried out into the evening. Thomas's voice, raised in earnest argument, and Clara's cool, deliberate counter-argument, and somewhere inside the quiet certainty of a sleeping infant. And around them the prairie breathed in the ancient, patient way of land that has witnessed everything and forgotten nothing and kept going anyway. She had come west with nothing but her name. He had said it was more than enough. They had spent 11 years proving that both of them were right. The Double F Ranch stood on its broad Kansas grassland under an enormous sky, and in the years that followed it would become known as one of the finest operations in the state, and the papers that came out of it would change how veterinarians and ranchers in the American West thought about livestock disease, and the woman at the center of it would eventually be cited, in a later era, as one of the founding practical researchers of American cattle medicine. But on this evening she was simply Kate Ford, sitting on her porch in the spring dusk with her husband's arm around her and her children's voices on the air, and the entirety of it, the whole long, difficult, luminous, demanding, worth every mile of it, was hers. Completely, permanently, irreversibly hers.